In this video, we will be addressing all of the important differences between quilting and sewing, as well as going over the differences between quilting and sewing machines. What is the difference between quilting and sewing? Quilting refers to stitching together 3 layers of fabric like a sandwich to create a decorative quilt blanket, while sewing refers to piecing fabric edges to create clothing, pillowcases, soft toys, curtains, and more. There are many aspects to both that I just can't wait to share with you. But first, what is quilting? Quilting is the art of making a quilt, usually a blanket, but can be also applied to bags and even clothing. A quilt is usually made up of 3 layers. Quilt top, a patchwork of colorful, off-cut fabric squares forms decorative top layer. Batting, a layer of fabric wadding forms the warm, puffy insulation. Quilt backing, a plain backing fabric serves as the underside of the quilt. The art of making a quilt is often done as social groups, with the pieces of fabric carrying some sentimentality. It makes a great gift and is made with a lot of love. What is sewing? Sewing refers to stitching together the edges of pieces of fabric, seam or finishing off a rough edge of fabric, hem to create clothing and other items. Can you quilt on a regular sewing machine? Okay. So firstly, sewing machines and quilting machines aren't exclusively different. There is no such thing really as a quilting machine that isn't also a sewing machine. They are, for the most part, the same thing, with certain features added or removed, depending on which of the 2 disciplines they focus on more. So you can absolutely quilt on a regular sewing machine, and you can absolutely sew on a quilting machine. It'll just become a lot easier when you have the right size, strength, and accessories for the job. Can you sew on a quilting machine? As explained before, there is no such thing as a quilting machine exclusively, so you can absolutely sew on your quilting machine. In fact, this is the easier choice if you plan on doing both quilting and sewing. What are the differences between quilting and sewing machines? Quilting machine. The major things you need to look for in a quilting machine is size of workspace, speed, extension table, and feet. Throat size. The throat is the length from the needle towards the machine itself. The longer the throat, the better for making bigger quilts. Ideally, if you're shopping for a quilting machine, you want to look for approx. An 8-inch throat at a minimum to increase your workspace for bigger quilts. Extension table. Some quilting machines come with an extension table. These are not necessary, but sure help to keep your project lined up a lot closer to perfect. Most machines that come with the extension table have the option to remove them as well. Stitches per minute. Quilting machines tend to have a much higher stitch per minute rating than sewing machines. This is very important for quilting to help get through each project quicker, especially for the binding, which is a lot of straight stitching. But most importantly, the increased number of stitches per minute also increases the machine's durability. The motor is a lot stronger and is more capable of pushing through many layers of fabric with ease. Foot accessories. Although both machines come with a number of different feet, only quilting machines have a couple that are entirely specific to quilting. These are a free motion or darning foot and a 1/4-inch foot. A free motion foot is typically used for free motion stitching, where you are free to move the fabric in any direction while stitching to create decorative patterns. Sewing machine. For a typical sewing machine, the size is quite different. All around, a sewing machine is smaller than a quilting machine. Aside from the size, a sewing machine has different feet included. Typically, the size of a regular sewing machine is classed as travel size, since it can be moved around when needed. It generally isn't longer than 12 in length and doesn't have a throat size much bigger than between 4 to 6 inches. Quilting vs sewing. If you want to dive deeper into quilting vs sewing, let's explore the differences one by one. Processes. In a way, quilting is just another type of sewing, but the processes are quite different. For quilting, the process typically includes creating a design, cutting and piecing, binding, pleat, and layering. For sewing, the process typically includes alterations, cutting out a pattern, cutting the fabric, etc. Layering. A quilt will always have 3 layers. The 3 layers are the carefully designed top, the batting in the middle, and then, of course, the backing. Sewing, however, is more simply put as just stitching 2 pieces of fabric together with a little bit of thread and a needle. Lining. Quilting has that middle layer, which is essentially a warm lining used for insulation. Most people use batting, but other materials can be used as well, such as flannel or fleece. Nonetheless, sewing doesn't usually require a middle layer, rescinding its appeal for extra warmth. Machines. When quilting and sewing first started out, they were both done by hand, but now, typically both are done with the use of a machine. Quilting machines generally have a higher impact for use and have many additions added to them. Sewing machines are a little simpler. Even though one could use a sewing machine to quilt, a quilting machine is much more capable. thus leading us to another big difference between sewing and quilting. Purpose. Last but certainly not least, the biggest and most obvious difference between the two is their purpose. Quilting is quite literally for quilts. Yes, it really is that simple. Although there are other things you could potentially quilt, bags, decorations, etc. Quilting generally refers to making a blanket, whereas sewing is generally simply referring to stitching two pieces of fabric together. Sewing is mostly used for making clothing items and accessories. We are almost wrapping up. These are the common differences between these two. Hope you like this video. Please comment, share, and subscribe to this channel for more videos.